So, in the poem, Another Sorrow, I think in many ways we can see this poem as a summary of much of what Blake has been trying to say throughout the Songs of Innocence. It's a poem about the interaction, or how all life interacts, and how we can't and how we shouldn't remain immune to the suffering of others. It also talks about how the figure of God, if correctly interpreted, may come to represent precisely that sense of compassion and respect that we should have for all forms of life, and which should inform our actions. Now, to some extent, this poem, when it starts off, it's not really a well, it's quite graphic in a sense. I think it's a statement of position. Within the first three stanzas, we have lots of rhetorical questions. One to 5 rhetorical questions that focus on very, very emotive issues. Talking about another's woe, about sorrow. Can we see another's grief and not try and seek that relief? Can you see a fool in tear and not feel my sorrows share? So there is this sense of or lack of empathy that we have for other people's sorrow. And these final 2 lines of those 3 stanzas, no, no, never can it be, never, never can it be, the repetition of never, and that kind of the negativity there. In a sense, we could be suggesting that this is Blake's incredulity that we allow others to suffer, and perhaps we can read into this that there is a sense of anger here. On the other hand, and there is kind of a complex irony here, we can suggest that actually there is a voice of innocence that we don't understand. What we do is we ignore societal problems, and this innocent voice doesn't shows that there is a lack of understanding of the sorrow and pain that there is in life. Obviously, Blake is writing at a time when things like child neglect were far worse than they are here, in the modern day. On the basis of the socioeconomic conditions at the time, and I think, in a sense, this shows the limitations of innocence, in that it doesn't recognise the pain. I think the poem kind of like focuses on both, because his response, his solution of this is to focus on God and God's love, God's view. As it follows on, can he who smiles on all hear the wren with sorrows small? So we have, he's talking about God as the solution here. Now, this is not God as the kind of oppressive ruler through presenting us with a set of rules and limitations in which to live. This is not that God of the Calvinist Church. This is not that oppressive God who forces us to suffer to show our undying love for him. This is Blake's idea of that all-encompassing, all-loving God, and this is how Blake, I think, presents some of his views on what that God represents. Because within these 3 stanzas here, we have those similar rhetorical questions, yet what it shows is that God feels pain for all of creation. He grieves for all of creation, the animals as well as the humans, which really show us that God's knowledge contrasts with the innocence of the speaker. Within this stanza here, from line 25, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 7th stanza, where he says, "He doth give his joy to all; he becomes an infant small." There is that allusion to Christ, that allusion to the fact that God sent. He becomes an infant small means he sent Christ down. He became a man of woe. He felt the suffering of humans. Okay, so through his Son, he feels the suffering of humans. Down within these last few stanzas here, it tells us that he gives us his joy, that our grief he may destroy. And that idea that God has created us, we know that he's created us. He repeats the word maker. He is a maker, not a ruler, not a king. He is someone who has created us. And what he does is he gives us his joy that our grief may destroy. So what he's trying to do through his joy, he's hoping that our grief may be temporary. It's telling us to accept the love of God, so that we can become happy in a sense. Till our grief is fled and gone, he does sit behind us and moan. He does sit by us and moan. So there is that sense of empathy there, and that sense of love that's given to us to try and help us through those really difficult times, those times when we are feeling grief, when we are feeling pain. And I think, in a sense, what Blake is suggesting is that that God, that love lives within all of us. We have the capability to make each other happy by taking each other's grief away, by giving us hope to take that grief away. And if we do that, then we won't have really a need for this poem, because then we will have empathy, we will have love. So I think that's what really the poem focuses on. We have that sense of, at the start of the poem, within this world of experience, there is this sense that we kind of ignore each other. We lack empathy. We don't help each other. And what Blake hopes for in the perfect world is for us to work together as a society to help one another.